Nicole, thanks so much for joining us today to kick off Ontario Cycling Women's Week. We have a huge, eventful, packed week of just activities from webinars to things in BMX, downhill, track, like a little bit of everything. So I'm really excited to have you kick this off too, because we want to talk about the involvement of women in cycling, but specifically in Ontario as well. And looking at your background, you have so much going on in your career, but also so much happening in cycling as well. So just to let the viewers know at home too, I did a little bit of working and a little bit of Googling on you, and just let me know if I'm correct on this. So you were a journalist at one point, mostly looking at your LinkedIn as well. You've worked a lot in the government of Ontario in various areas, from legislative aid at Parliament Hill to what you're doing now with what was it, the supply chain. Okay, yeah, just everything. And on top of that, you also have a lot of background in volunteering as well. I'm seeing in the Alzheimer's Society board, and also a lot in the community as well. So that's the thing that I think you and I can really connect on, is that we do so much out of our heart for the cycling community. So I see that you've done a lot of things in for racing, for the Dark Horse Flyers, for example. You sat on the board there, and you've also have raced in cross country and downhill, and I see some gravel as well. So you're a woman of everything. The thing I wanted to talk as well is the fact that you're also a member of the Métis Nations of Ontario too. That's something that's really important to me, is that we're proud of where our background is from. So yeah, that is you on a nutshell. Let's dive into the fact of just who you are. Who is Nicole? Let's talk about your background in cycling. First of all, how did you catch the cycling bug?
Well, first off, thanks for the opportunity to chat. The women in cycling is very important to me, and you just made me sound very, very good. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
I don't think my mom could make me sound that good. So yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity. I think for me, like many people that have come into cycling, I kind of came into it sort of gradually. I was, like many kids, one of those kids that just always loved bikes. And I was always on bikes when I could be. No formal training or coaching or anything as a kid, but I was always on bikes. And I didn't have a car as a teenager, and everything was far away. So, I rode a lot of kilometers to get to places, to get to work often. I had one job where I was riding 25 kilometers each way to get to and from work. And that kind of really got it got me interested in more longer distance cycling. And then I got lucky and met a good group of friends. And when I graduated from university and had enough money to buy a half decent bike, a Kona, for anyone that's a Kona nerd, I started racing and started taking it more seriously. And I just fell in love with the community, and I fell in love with the sport, and I fell in love with the competitive aspect of it. And the rest is history, and now I have way too many bikes.
That is a bike life problem, of having too many bikes. The topic of community is huge as well. I think that's the only reason why we stay in the sport as long as we do, is because of the community. So when you got into the sport, were there other women doing what you were doing? Was there any barriers there that you find?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one I've spent a lot of time thinking about, because I do think there are a lot of barriers for various people, not just women. And I think the sport, the current makeup of the sport to a certain extent does reflect those barriers, because at each barrier it tends to weed, unfortunately, people out. So I think it's an important conversation that we need to continue to have, and it's one that in the OCA we've recognized in the strategic plan as a board. I think the barriers at the basic level are things like cost. Cost is a big one for people that may be from minority communities, or whether they're new Canadians, whether they're Indigenous people, whether they're racialized people. That's a big one. It can be an expensive sport. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. I think the other barriers are trickier to put a finger on, and they're often trickier to unpack, and I do think there can be cultural barriers. The sport traditionally has, I would argue, has been very male centered, and for myself, like when I started riding, especially at a at a fairly high level, I was never pro or anything, but I did race E1-2 for many years, and to train for that level of riding, you really do have to train with people that are stronger than you, which was men. And I was
Mm-hmm.
training with groups of 40, 50, 80, 90, 100 men with
Yeah.
rarely another woman, or there was one other woman, that would have been in the group. So, my cycling community was 95% male.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sounds right.
largely, yeah, and it was very white, if I'm frank.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I obviously can pass as white, so I'm aware of that discrepancy for folks that are not white as well. And I think then it comes down to the community that you end up in, because it can be, first of all, it can be intimidating, to be the only different one in a group.
Yeah.
And it can also be, it can be more than intimidating. I know a lot of women that I rode with and raced with, they had some pretty bad horror stories, whether it was, people touching them in unwanted ways or comments made to them. And I had my fair share of comments that were really offline as well. But
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think for myself, if I look back on that time, I think one of the factors that made it easier for me is that I was in a community with some close friends who were senior in the sport. They were, some of the best road racers in Ontario, and they were my longtime friends. And so that was kind of my baseline, was they treated me
Yeah.
with respect and dignity, and they always gave me the impression that I belonged and that, I could kind of put my shoulders back. And when someone said something, or when there was an attitude that, that I didn't belong on a ride, that I knew that, if if Isaac Smith, one of the strongest riders in Ontario, if he believes that I belong, I belong.
Yeah.
And there was a few others like him as well, but they were really the ones that I think gave me the confidence to show up and say, even if I'm the only female here, and there's a bit of an attitude that this is not the ride for me, and because
Mm-hmm.
comments were sometimes made,
Mm-hmm.
the question of, do you know how to get home? Like that kind of thing, with the assumption that I couldn't hack it. I think it would have turned me away, but I was lucky. I had that community. The other thing I think, though, it did force me to do is I always felt like I could never be the slowest person on any ride. I always had to be in the top third. I was never going
Yeah.
to be the strongest in a group of male elite riders, but I always felt like I could never be the slowest. As the only woman in the group, I could never be the slowest. And if I was the slowest, I'd just go home. I'd start the ride. I'd learn that I couldn't hang on, and I'd leave. So it forced me to be very, very strong. And I look back at that time, and I think that's a bit of a challenge, because it's a high price to pay. You have to train a lot, and you have to put your body through a lot if you hold yourself to that standard where
Mm-hmm.
you're on these routine group rides where you feel like you don't ever have that ability to be one of the slower people, just because of a gender issue, right?
Yeah.
So it creates a dynamic that can be very tough, and as I said, it can be hard on your body. It's a lot of training. And I'm a big believer that that women cyclists can be as fast as male cyclists in many aspects of the sport, but
We're
there's
built
also,
for it, actually, if you think about
exactly,
it. Yeah.
especially the endurance sports,
Mm-hmm.
there is a reality too that most guys can put out more power, especially on the sprint, in a sprint basis. So there is a dynamic difference. So for example, when we look at power, the power output, I may be able to sustain a pace over, 150 kilometers, but for me to punch up a hill on that ride the way some of my male cycling friends do, I weigh 120 pounds. And so
Mm-hmm.
if it's a short, punchy hill, there is a physiological dynamic that exists. And I think so, that's a reality as well, that, there's many unbelievably strong women out there, and there's many unbelievably strong guys, but I think we have to recognize as a sport that, I always say we work together to stay together, in these group
Yeah.
ride dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think the other big barrier for a lot of women when I speak with women in the sport is the safety issue. Like
Hmm.
cycling is dangerous as a sport. It's one of
Hmm.
the few sports where you're going to be concerned about getting hit by a car, right?
Yeah.
Which many of
Hmm.
us have been hit by a car badly.
Hmm.
So it's understandable that for many women, I think that, and many men as well, like many people generally, that risk analysis that they do, especially riding in cities, um, is one that it can prevent them from getting very involved in the sport.
Hmm.
And the off-road um, disciplines are no different. I can't speak to BMX very much because I'm not a BMX expert, but when we start talking about downhill and cross country mountain biking, there's a certain element of training that's required, and that often means you need to be somewhere where you can be trained, or
Hmm.
you need to know people that can train you to do the sport safely. Otherwise, it can feel like a very dangerous sport, and it frankly can be dangerous. So I think that ability to have access to training is a big one. And again, I
Oh
got
yeah.
lucky. I had
Hmm.
friends that were willing to show me the basics. But I also suffered a lot of injuries because, I also didn't have professional training at any point,
Hmm.
until much, much later, in my racing. And I think that's another challenge for us as a sport is to ensure that all people have access to training to make sure that they can participate in the sport in a safe manner in these off-road sports.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of parallels actually, even in BMX as you're describing, the fact that sometimes you had to fight to belong in that community, and having a crew helps you feel like you belong at that table, so to speak, right? No, there's a lot of parallels, and there's a lot of like, if people as a whole were nicer and just giving ladies a chance to like be invited, we wouldn't have to work so hard to feel like we belong. But I'm also with you as well. Like I will say that despite having to train harder to not be last, it's made me a better rider. So it's kind of like, oh, I'm gonna be thankful for that abuse just because it's made me a tougher person. But it's very intimidating for someone who doesn't necessarily have the same drive as we do, who will want to like who would want to join a sport like this. That's the intimidating part, and that's where I think that barrier needs to be more demolished at this point so that more people can get involved, because there's so much potential out there. There's so many ladies that could potentially be the next Kelsey Mitchell if we were more welcoming at a grassroots level.
And I think,
Yeah.
to that point, I think
Hmm.
often the solutions are pretty simple. Like I
Hmm.
think back on there was some very elite women that gave me some advice early on that was super helpful. And I think, whether it's more experienced cyclists giving newer cyclists advice, or it's simply just ensuring that new people are welcomed into a group dynamic. And that can be
Yeah.
as simple as saying, hi, my name is so and so, welcome to this group
Yes.
dynamic. What did you do this summer? Like, what do you do for fun? Or what do you like to read or whatever? But just
Yep.
ensuring the person feels like they belong on that day in that group, as opposed to showing up to a group not knowing anybody and having no one to talk to you, which
Yeah.
that can be kind of intimidating. So I think for me, one of the things that I see that works really well is, in groups that do have, a good diversity of people in their organization, that's something they prioritize. They're at a basic
Hmm.
level, they're really welcoming to new folks, and they make
Hmm.
sure the new folks have access to training, or,
Yep.
know names, they're welcome to social events, and that they have people in the group that, they make the effort to go out there and say, hi, like, welcome, we're not going to the Olympics, we're just here for fun, so come have some
Yep.
fun with us, like,
And
and
who
that's all
knows
it
what that could
takes.
spark? Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's why
totally.
like women's weeks or women weekends are so important. My first experience was actually women's weekend. I raced mountain bike in Ohio, and I had no idea what to expect. But there was nothing but support and praise and just encouragement from other women. And it was okay to look stupid. And I think
Totally.
that's one of the barriers, is that a lot of women don't want to start trying something because they don't want to look stupid, or they have this like really high level expectations that they should like be a pro right off the bat, and that's not how it works. Yeah.
And I think generationally, like, and I do think this is changing, but at least the age I'm at,
Mm-hmm.
there was more males that grew up messing around on bikes than young
Yep.
girls rather. And so sometimes the women are coming at it with a bit less experience. And so they just
Mm-hmm.
need to bridge that gap to gain that additional experience that the guys may have had when they were riding when they were 14, 15, 16. And obviously, I'm generalizing a lot in this conversation, but I think it's something that we do need to consider as we build these programs for any new rider, whether that's
Yeah.
trans folks or whether it's racialized people or whether it's women or whatever. But when we start having these inclusive conversations, it's about making sure that we recognize that people come at the sport with different previous experiences and
Mm-hmm.
with a different idea of what the sport's about too, and we have to respect that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. No. To add on your point of, you know, there's more guys who have other buddies that ride together and then they can, kind of feed off each other. I find that when I was growing up, I didn't have that. I was like the only girl that was doing what I was doing. And luckily, with social media, actually, it's really helped me see not only other younger girls actually develop even faster, but there's a whole new community now that helps you feel like you're not alone and that you're not a freak because you're doing this separate sport. Now that's for BMX. So what's been social media like in your world and in downhill and road and everything else that you've seen?
yes, I find the social media conversation about women in cycling is fascinating, and I've
Hmm.
spent a lot of time thinking about this because it is a really like it has changed the sport in a lot of ways. I would agree with you that it has raised the profile of women in cycling. Because I think sometimes, there was a bit of a view, you turn up to some place and they'd be looked at a bit like a unicorn, depending on where you were, like, oh, lady.
Yes. Yep.
But
Yes.
she got her lady parts on the bike. But I sort of think that has changed a little bit in that, especially when we start seeing women in advertising for cycling products. And I
Hmm.
just remember one of the first bike shows I went to, one of the brands, they're an Italian brand, had women in go-go boots and bikinis next to the bikes.
Yeah.
As they clearly weren't cyclists. They were there to sell the bikes and make them look sexy. But
Hmm.
that's where we've come from just a few years ago. And now we're at a point where, we see those same brands that have actual female cyclists being represented by their brands in their social media and in their advertising, which is wonderful, right? Like it's really
Hmm.
good. And more than just, one type of person in their in their advertising. But so I think that's one really positive aspect. But I think the other side of that is, especially with women in cycling, there can also be this, and I got to be a little careful how I put this, but there can be a sexualization of women in sport in a way that they may not exist for the male side of things. Um,
Hmm.
in that, I think it's there can be this idea um, that women in cycling are primarily, you know, there's a bit of fetishization, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've seen
Um,
it.
if that makes sense,
Yeah.
and girls on bikes kind of thing. Because
Hmm.
and I'm of two minds. I think it raises the profile of women in cycling, and if women are empowered to show off their bodies on their bikes, great, more power to them. But I do think that it can sometimes also take the focus away from the athleticism involved. And I think if it becomes only about that, if we have pro riders who are only about the how fancy they look on bikes, and we're not
Hmm.
focusing on the amazing accomplishments that they do, then sometimes there's a bit of an imbalance that I worry a little bit about. Um, and I know women have expressed to me, especially at the more elite levels, that there's a lot of pressure often on elite female athletes to look good on social media for their brands in order to support their cycling, their
Yeah.
ability to do the sport. And that I don't think exists in the same way for many of the males. So I think that's something that there's a discussion that needs to happen around that, because women need to be sponsored and supported as athletes, regardless of their social media output. If
Yeah.
they look fabulous on social media, that's wonderful. Like, more power
Hmm.
to them.
Hmm.
But it can't be the only way that women can exist and support themselves at an elite level in the sport. So I think we do just have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a lot to unpack actually, because if you think about it, I realized this recently that I feel like women in the sport of cycling have to be everything. They have to be a super athlete. They have to be attractive. They have to be good speakers, be marketable. Whereas guys, oh, be fit, right? Because being fit means more medals. But for
And a
guys,
specific body type. Like, I think that's the
yeah,
other thing.
yeah.
It often comes down to a specific body type as well.
Hmm. And it's
Yeah,
still and it's still the traditional body type is what wins, but it's not natural when you're a high level athlete. You're going to be not proportioned because your legs are going to be bigger. Because you look at the guys. Well, I'm sorry, guys, but you don't have to do as much. The more you train, the more you look the part. And
I think,
hopefully, yeah,
and I
yeah.
think in cycling we do. Sorry to interrupt you. We do fall
No, it's
into
like,
this fallacy that a certain body type is what is fast. But when you look at
mm-hmm,
the elite riders across our disciplines, there's all different body types, and
mm-hmm,
all body types belong in cycling. Whether that's, people that have had amputations or have had injuries of various types and are now racing as para athletes, or it's people that just have different body types, ectomorphs, endomorphs, whatever. I think
mm-hmm.
that we in cycling need to get better at embracing the fact that all body types belong in cycling and are good at cycling. Like, that's the other thing. It's not just that they belong, but that you can have very different body types at the world stage, on the world stage, at the racing at the international level, and especially when you look at across track, across
Mm-hmm.
BMX, across cross country mountain, and like cyclocross and road. Like, there are a variety of bodies,
Oh
and
yeah.
especially on women and people who identify as women, those body types change, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. And those people are fast.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point about the social media, we do need to move away from this sort of very homogeneous look of what a woman on a bike is,
Yeah.
from an
Yeah.
image perspective.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. In the world of BMX, we have a really talented female rider. She's won silver at the Olympics and multiple World Cups. Beautiful human being. And the only thing I can say is that she was like me when I was younger, and she had broader shoulders, and it comes with the fact that she's riding BMX and she's taking hard hits. And I hear guys make comments about her all the time. Social media, I see it all the time, and it's heartbreaking. This
Yeah, it's
wonderful
not
human
okay.
being,
It's not okay.
yeah, it's not okay. And it's gotten to the point where I've just like I had to snap back because you don't know this person, you don't know the fact that they're great, they're a great person, they're doing great things for the sport, and you're jumping on them because they don't have the typical feminine body. On that side as well, I think girls too are still struggling with being okay with being feminine in a sport like cycling as well, because there's still a lot of guys I'm finding still that are they will judge you regardless if you look feminine or if you don't look feminine. I have a friend who posts sometimes like lifestyle photos of her looking cute and pretty, and she'll get comments from this one particular guy saying that she shouldn't do that. She should have the ability to post lifestyle posts and cycling. Like that's just who she is. Right? There's a lot of judgment I'm finding. You can't seem to ever win.
And it comes
Yeah.
back to this idea that everybody belongs in cycling.
Yeah.
Everybody and everybody.
Everybody.
Like,
Yep.
every
Hmm.
person and every body, no matter what your body is or
Yep.
what your body's been through, there is a place for you in cycling. And I think that needs to continue to evolve. We need to keep pushing that idea.
Yeah,
Um,
more representation for sure. I think that always helps for sure.
and you don't get to comment on people's bodies. I think that's the other
Hmm.
thing that we need to stop in our sport. I know we have a sport that for many folks there's the struggle with body image and eating disorders,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
commenting on other people's bodies does not help with that. So I think
Hmm.
I think we need to get to a place where it's no longer acceptable to comment on somebody else's body.
Yeah,
Uh,
even if it's not directly at you, even for me hearing that about someone else, that hurts me so much. And I wish people would know that, and eating disorders and body issues, that is often a closeted issue. So I hopefully this will let people know to just be a little bit more mindful when they're making comments like that, or just
no,
don't.
exactly. Just
It's not
don't
doing anything
comment.
for you anyways. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not
Yeah.
necessary. Comment on the bike. You want to chat about someone's bike?
Yeah.
By all means, chat about their bike. But
Yeah.
yeah, just
That's
don't
yeah.
comment on people's bodies.
let's solve the
Love
parts and tire pressure and all that stuff. But
sure.
yeah,
Outfits, whatever. But yeah, don't make comments about people's bodies, positive or negative. It just, there's not,
exactly.
it doesn't work.
Do you feel like it's gotten better since you first started biking?
It's interesting. So I find that, I spend a lot of time chatting with people. I'm quite chatty, and I spend a lot of time chatting with people on group rides. And the conversation often revolves around body image and conversations around body. And I think there's still a pretty big problem where folks feel like their body's not good enough for various reasons. And part of it just may be
Hmm.
the fact that many of us are in spandex all the time, which, is very revealing. And
Yes.
so the comparisons are pretty easy because you can look at the person next to you and kind of compare your body to their body. But I do think that, to your point about it being in sort of an undercurrent, I do think that we still have issues with an undercurrent of problems where people, yeah, they struggle with body image and body confidence, and this fallacy that you have to look a certain way in your body to be fast.
Hmm.
I think that that's still pretty prevalent in the sport across the genders. It's not just something that affects women; it affects men in a big way too.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's something that we do need to keep talking about, because we've all struggled with body. To me, anybody
Yeah.
that's been
Yeah.
racing, has struggled generally with body image, and whether, yeah, I need to lose weight and I need to get, because we make the equation that, the skinnier I am, the faster I
Yeah.
am, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a straight line like that all the time. Like it's not as
Hmm.
straight as we think it is, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And there's a cost to continually thinking about food and body all the time.
Hmm.
There's a
It's a
mental health
big mental
cost.
stress. Yeah, for sure. And to give the guys credit as well, like this is not just a women centric issue. This is across the board as well. Like I was at dinner with a bunch of guys, and I this was the first time I've ever heard of this, but the guys were talking about cutting back on calories and eating better because they want to look better. And I've never seen guys talk about that. It's usually as women, I think we're more vulnerable and we're able to speak up like, "Ah, we're feeling fat today or my face is bloated or something." But guys, you never hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I just think, yeah, anytime that anybody is obsessing over food, it's problematic. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think it is an issue in our sport just because of the nature of our sport. But yeah, it comes back to the mental health, I think, conversations in our sport as well. I
Hmm.
think, and I think it's a double-edged sword, because there's a positivity to the community, and I think the community is a place where people feel comfortable raising mental health issues or body image issues. But then, as a community, the other side of that is we have to make sure that we can support people through, as a community, as they
Hmm.
go through those struggles, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people talk about their body image problems with their cycling friends or with their
Yep.
their eating disorders, really.
Yeah.
And I think, if we as a community can help provide people with those tools, to support them, through those struggles, that's ideal, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, the biggest thing that would help is to look at nutrition as performance and not, putting pressure on your body on how you look. That said, I will have to plug that we do have a mental health webinar and a nutrition webinar coming during this week as well. So I think I'll actually make sure to mention with the ladies to kind of tap into that as well. Mental health is such a huge thing for me, and I feel that it's good that finally we're able to talk about it more openly as well. Guys can do a better job of it. I have a lot in the sport of cycling. There's a lot of macho dudes, and they have a hard time speaking vulnerably about what they're suffering with. So hopefully, this webinar that's coming up will help open up the floodgates a bit. Okay, we're back.
Awesome.
Okay, so yeah, there was a lot to unpack, but let's talk about the positives on what brands are currently doing. Are there brands right now that are doing a good job that we can plug just to give them some love right now, that are actually embracing all bodies, embracing all diversities?
Yeah, like I I don't know if there's any brand that's hitting both of those, and that's not to say there isn't. It just may be that I'm not aware of them. I know
Mm-hmm.
I can think most prominently of the brands that are struggling to do this.
Should we call them out on this?
I think I'll pass on calling them out. But what I can say is I think that some of the local clubs and local shops and local teams do a good job of really working hard to push forward, inclusion and diversity and anti-racism within the sport. And I think there are some great groups in Ontario that do a really good job on that, and it can be simple. And I also think that they are also often the organizations that really are inclusive with youth. They work to get young people who may not be captured by the sport interested at a young age, which is important too from an inclusion and diversity perspective, because I think if we want to have a more representative sport that looks like the communities we live in, it looks like a diverse Ontario, we need to start at a young age. We need to bring
Yeah.
people into the sport when they're children. And I think the groups like, at Mountain View, the folks in Midland have done a really good job, subsidizing programming and ensuring that kids have, access to good sport at a young age, and equality training and all that kind of thing. And I know there's many others, but that's one. AWI has done a good job of the, same thing, subsidized training for young athletes. Here in Toronto, I know of a few. I know the Dark Horse Flyers that I've been involved with has very good gender parity and has had for many years. In terms of, and I know there's a few groups north of the city that have a good diverse representation of people in their organizations and in their clubs. I know when I started racing, I got lucky with Bateman's. They were very, very welcoming to me as a racer and treated me. It was a small team. There was only a handful of us, maybe like 10 or 12. But it was made clear from day one that as one of only two women on the team, that I was equal to the other riders. Like I equal podium prizes, equal, I had equal everything. And at the time that was rare. At the time, there was no other organization that I was aware of that would have offered me that, especially at the level. Like I was an amateur E1 too. But they really stepped up and treated me like any other racer. And I will be forever grateful for that. So I think, there is a lot more of that now, that is happening at the team and the club level, which is good to see. I think it's important that we continue to lean on the brands that, that provide our equipment and our gear and our clothing to ensure that their products not only reflect in their advertising, but in their actual products. Like I'm sure we've all done that search to find, like for me, trying to find downhill mountain biking gear that fits my, 5'6" frame that isn't for children. It was tough,
Yeah.
and it's, or finding seats that fit, female anatomy, those kind of things can still be an issue. So to me, it's that further question about how do we find the equipment. I know when I started racing, finding a bike that was in the right size and fit properly wasn't always easy. Those smaller bikes, especially when you start to get into the more specific ones, like, the downhill race bikes that are, fairly specific, they can be sometimes a little trickier to find. So, ensuring that we're frequenting those shops that prioritize the women's needs as well as the men's, that they carry women's gear and women's clothing. I think that's super important, because it allows for that accessibility.
Yeah, it's shocking still for today that there isn't more options. It's gone a lot better than say 10 years ago, but it's we had a meeting with a brand not too long ago. They were asking us, how can we do better, because females are 50% of the market and we're not hitting it. And that alone should be something that's ringing through every company's ear right now, that they're missing out on 50% profit. Let's put some numbers out, So yeah, it's shocking that to hear that it's still a struggle, even for you, to find parts, or for myself, I guess I can relate to maybe like jerseys or like gear. It's still hard to find a women's fit. And we've just gotten used to just wearing guys fit, or putting on a guy's seat because it's the only thing that's available. But I think bike shops and brands and companies should take a look at that.
And I'm pretty straight sized, like as sizing goes, but for folks that are not straight sizes, that's even
Mm-hmm.
tougher, whether they,
Oh yeah.
have, like, it can be impossible, I think, for folks that may have body types that are not as I'm going to use the word common, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point that all bodies belong in cycling, it's important that those folks have the opportunity to wear, safe and appropriate clothing that they feel comfortable and happy in, that
Yeah.
because that's also a barrier. That's one of those, invisible barriers that if you can't, if you're trans or you're somebody that may be a different body type and you can't find gear that works, that's an issue.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's a requirement because there were certain BMX race events that I went to, and it's sanctioned where you have to wear race pants. And unfortunately, at that time when I was racing in Canada too, like we don't have as much product as the States do. The only thing I could get were these like Troy Lee pants, and they were just like just straight down. They pulled into the waist in a way that I couldn't even breathe properly. But it was either getting something a little bit smaller and tapered or get something really huge and risk actually getting it caught on something. So it's evolved since. That was about 5 or so years ago. But there's so much more that can be done. And there's that whole adage, you look good or you look good, you feel good, you ride good, you know?
well, and for me, I find it's even small things like,
Mm-hmm.
I wear an extra small in cycling clothing, and so the pockets are about, this big because they traditionally shrunk it and then changed the color. And so you can't
Oh,
fit anything. Like, you can't fit a phone in a pocket because the pocket is too small. And so it's basics like that from a design perspective, I'm not just a smaller version of a larger man. Like,
hmm,
and many folks aren't. So it's that gap between saying, okay, how do we, how do we design this so it works for women as opposed to just pink it and shrink it,
yeah, that's just lazy,
Um,
lazy work there. Oh my goodness. Um, so if you could draw out let's say, an easy 5-step plan of just check marks that brands should take a look at least do the bare minimum to make sure they're taking that step forward, like what are like 5 things they
I,
should do?
I think it's UX, it's user design and user research is often the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing. I know companies like Norco will pay one of their elite female riders or will use one of the riders that ride for them to give feedback on things like their bikes, right? Because
Amazing. Yeah.
especially with certain bikes, when you shrink the bike down to, a smaller person's size, the dynamics may not be the same. The turning is not the same. You could get wheel kick, all that kind of stuff. So I think, the list that brands really need to do is to check with their users, check with their riders, check with the people that use the bikes a lot, and see what's working and what's not. And it's not rocket science to me. Like, we're not talking wholesale redesign. We're just saying, like, let's just look at the mechanics here and make sure this thing is still functional.
Mm-hmm.
And that it doesn't cause major issues. Because there has been examples of bikes that the small sizes are pretty poorly designed.
Yeah.
So I think it's that kind of thing with the bikes, and similarly with the gear and the clothing. Like, if you're designing, any sort of clothing for women, or if you're designing the guards for downhilling, whether it's the chest plates or the arm guards, the armor has to be designed so that people can move, but that,
Yeah.
it also accounts for the fact that my legs and my hips may not be the same shape as somebody who's, has similar size hips but is a
Mm-hmm.
guy.
Mm-hmm.
They're designed a little bit differently, so will they still stay up? Like, that's, one of the issues for me is like, will the product still stay up? Can I race in it? Can I ride it all day long? Is it comfortable? Like, I think those kind of basic things, that, in even at the basic level, like, we all wear bibs, right? We all wear bib shorts, but to use the washroom in the woods as a
Yep.
woman to pee, it
You
can
gotta
be
take
a
everything
challenge.
off. Yeah.
You got to take it all off, right? But wearing just the shorts is not always an option either. So those kinds of design considerations, I think, are things that we're still evolving to that. But the brands that are able to crack those problems, like, they will make good money, because there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of us that are like, if we find something better designed, we'll buy it because we use it all the time.
Also,
Um,
right now, if they would do that, it's a monopoly because they would be the only ones that would be, let's say, doing a custom breastplate for one of those like guards that you were talking about, right? Because the ones that I've seen, they're either one big dome or they're just like flat. And it's like watching it's like looking at Dot from Reboot back in the day, that cartoon show when the first two seasons where they couldn't have boobs, so they just made her like flat chested or like just square chested. So there's a monopoly
yeah.
to
I,
gain. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of us end up wearing body armor designed for teenagers because
Yeah.
we're that size, but I don't have the same body as a teenage boy.
No.
So I think that's a learning curve there that, and sometimes the product is available, but it's very difficult to find in Canada. That's the other piece of
Yes.
that.
Yep.
Is that they're just not the markets. And I can see it from the supplier perspective as well, where I know that, like if I race downhill, there's, 100 or 200 guys and there's like 8 women. So I
Hmm.
get it that the market is much, much smaller. There is a balance there, but as our supply chains level out post pandemic, hopefully that's something that, can be solved as well.
Yeah, it'll probably be not for another 2 years at this rate with how crazy everything is.
Yeah.
No, that's some great tips there for sure. So let's talk about what you do as the chair of the OCA board, and then let's talk also about like how this new position is hopefully influencing how we do everything else in Ontario. But yeah, let's talk about that. Like you were introduced in 2021. What was the application process like? What is it like now being the chair there?
Yeah, so I haven't been the chair for too long. We had
Mhm.
a previous chair to me, who was wonderful, Graham Rivers. He did an amazing job. Um, but I was elected. I ran on a platform of inclusion, diversity. I had a few other key priorities that I said these are things that are important for me. Things like youth involvement, affordability in the sport, level playing field, safe sport for all those kinds of things. Like I had a number of those pieces, a formalization of some of the processes associated with Ontario cycling, finance, all that kind of stuff. And the organization was well run before. Like, don't get me wrong, it was well run, but I think there was room for improvement.
Hmm.
And so since I have joined the board, our previous CEO had retired, and we have hired a new CEO in Pamela, and she's phenomenal. So we
She
have a
is.
female CEO, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. So this will be the first time in the organization's history that we have a female CEO and a female board chair. And I come at it with a history in professionally in governance and oversight experience, as
Hmm.
well as obviously communications from being a journalist. Um, so I think for me and I don't want to speak for Pam, but I think for both of us, we are aligned on a lot of pieces, and we are really trying to push forward that strategic plan that outlines the goals for the organization, and that was developed in consultation with the members, and it was developed, with a lot of time with the board itself. And the staff at the OCA, the staff themselves are wonderful as well. The Ontario cycling staff are absolute heroes. So I got to
Hmm.
give them a plug. But so that document really brings together all the ideas from the people that have been heavily involved in cycling for a long time. And so as a board chair, I think that's my main focus, is ensuring that we can push forward those priorities that are laid out there. And they are the things that, I spoke about, making it easier for youth athletes, making it more affordable for youth athletes and for all athletes, ensuring that the clubs are supported, trying to reduce red tape associated with cycling.
Hmm.
Um,
That's a tough
making
one. That's
It's a tough one. It is
they're
a tough
tough
one.
shape.
It's a
Yeah.
tough one. It's a small organization. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Making the sport more accessible, ensuring that we have expectations around the behavior and the professionalism associated with the formalized aspects of the sport, ensuring we have good concussion practices in place if someone does suffer a concussion, ensuring that the sport is safe from a safe sport perspective, ensuring that we're supporting our coaching community and that we have avenues for folks to have formal coaching, like
Hmm.
all those pieces, ensuring that the organization has sound financial management and that it has the governance tools in place and that we have opportunities to regularly communicate with our members. I
Hmm.
think that's something that this board has definitely pushed and has put in place, this idea that the organization really is owned by the members. So we want to make sure we're consulting with them on a live basis, meaning, after every race, there's an opportunity for people to jump in and tell us how the race went, what happened,
Yeah.
how was it run, all that kind of thing. And there's an opportunity to talk to the board, and there's an opportunity to talk to the staff of Ontario Cycling. Like, I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is ensure that the members play a more active role in their organization, because Ontario Cycling is their organization, and
Yep.
that we really represent all the types of cyclists and all the types of people that want to be in the sport. So I think that's a big part of why I chose to run, and it's what I'm hoping I'm doing. We are volunteers, which I think is also something that is important to remember. So the board itself and the people that are on the committees, they are volunteers, and they do this on a volunteer basis.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always looking for folks. So we are always looking for people that care about the athletes and care about the sport and care about the organization. And whether that's board involvement or committee involvement, if people are interested, contact me, contact Pam. We'd love to have you sit on our committees. It's a community thing. Like, the oversight and the leadership and the support of Ontario Cycling is done by volunteers in our community. And of course by the amazing staff, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something that I think we've evolved quite a bit recently, and it's thanks to a lot of people, and I look forward to the next year for sure.
Yeah, I've seen a huge difference from what it was before and what it is now. It's a lot warmer. It's a lot more inviting. Heck, I'm like involved with this, so this is phenomenal. And I've seen a huge change in how things are being done. So thank you for the high level overview of what your goals are. You basically answered my next question for that.
If I can,
Yeah,
sorry, if I can add one more quick thing.
yeah.
If folks find something isn't working, tell us. Like, Pam has been very open about listening to what the community is saying. So
Hmm.
I do think it's important to note that if folks feel like something's not working for them in the sport, call the OCA or write them an email and tell them, professionally, obviously, and courteously, but feel free to tell them. We want to listen. We want to hear what's happening on the ground, so we can change, so that we can evolve. And we can't solve
Yeah.
every problem overnight, but we can chip away at them, and we can try and make a difference.
Yeah, the fact that you're inviting that is just already huge by itself. And I think it's important to recognize that you guys are recognizing that there are opportunities, and especially if we're looking at Ontario as a whole, it's so multicultural. I know my parents, they came over to Canada in their late 20s, and I don't think getting me involved in cycling would have naturally been a choice for them, because there are more important priorities. I got into the sport very late in my 20s, actually, or my late teens. But a new family that's coming here isn't going to necessarily think, I'm going to have little Bo like go into this sport or something, because no, we've got bills to pay. The kids got to focus on school. Extracurricular stuff is not going to be a priority. And I think it's beautiful that you're offering opportunities for the youth to actually get involved with the sport, and looking at ways to do it for free too. So that's awesome.
The goal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. So you started your position as chair. What are some like new, I guess, goals that you've implemented that are happening right now that is a total black and white difference from what it was like before, that you're proud of?
Yeah, and I have to stress, it's not just me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm one person. It's definitely a group effort, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes that have done a lot of work. But
Mhm.
I think some of the things that I would say I'm proud of we've done is hiring a wonderful CEO. We definitely did that. She's got great previous sport experience. She brings an enthusiasm and a professionalism that is just it's wonderful. I will say as well, the formalization of the strategic plan that builds out, the horizon for us as a sporting authority. I think that's a big accomplishment. I think the conversations we've had around inclusion and diversity, and the continued focus on it's not the end, but it's certainly a beginning, which I am proud
Mhm.
of.
Mhm.
I think the grants we've received, because of the work that the staff at Ontario Cycling have put in, are a huge step forward.
Mhm.
We've received some large grants that will be able to support the sport and support various initiatives in the sport, um, and support the athletes, I think. So I think those are some of the big accomplishments that, that I think are things that are worth are worth focusing on. But again, I do
Yeah.
have to really stress that it's definitely not just me. There's a lot of folks that are also doing this.
And you're looking for new members for the board right now, right? Because there's an application that's out.
Yeah, and so we're kind of constantly looking for people, really.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, we have formed a nominations committee that's new. So at our next AGM, the folks that put their names forward to be on the board, they will have been reviewed by the nominations committee, and the nominations committee will put forward recommendations, and then the members will vote at the AGM on our newer members, because
Yeah.
we are not a full board right now. Um, but we also have a lot of committee positions that we need to fill, whether
Hmm.
that's on committees like the nominations committee, the finance committee. We'll have an athlete at large. We'll have a number of positions that will inform the board. And so I think if people are interested in volunteering with Ontario Cycling, then that's something that is a great way to kind of try it out. It's usually
Hmm.
not a very heavy time commitment, the committees, but it allows people to understand how things work, and if they might want to be on the board at a future date, if
Yeah.
that's a good fit for them. But yeah, it takes a village kind of thing, and there's a lot of really dedicated volunteers, obviously, in this community and in this sport. And Ontario Cycling is no different, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so if folks are interested, I would really encourage you to check out the website, apply for a committee, or note to me or to Pam that you're interested in a committee,
Hmm.
because really we can always use people's enthusiasm and big brains.
Yeah, and just to plug this as well, I think we need more women on the board too, because last
We
I
do.
checked, there weren't any applications from women, which is shocking.
Yeah, and the challenge with that is the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act does require that we have gender parity or close to gender
Hmm.
parity. So
Hmm.
we actually have a corporate requirement to have more women on the board.
Hmm.
And so that has definitely been a priority for me. It's challenging because the sport, still does not have gender parity.
Yeah.
So yeah, we really could use some more women on the board for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. I'll make sure to include some links at the bottom too, because I believe we're still looking at this point. So my last question is to talk about your background, because we personally had a talk about this offline a couple of days ago, about your Metis background, and I do have a friend who has a Metis background as well, and I'll introduce you to soon. But it seems to be a rare thing, right, to have Metis and also be a cyclist as well. What can we do to help to just bring more awareness? Like, can we start clinics? Like, what could Ontario Cycling do? What could people in the community do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And like, I will note that, so I'm AT, which is, as you said, is the word means mixed essentially, right? So I'm mixed
Mm-hmm.
blood.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I look white, like many Métis people, but, it, it- the, so I can't speak for all, obviously I can't speak for all Indigenous people. I do want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, people with Indigenous heritage, it's, cycling, there's a few barriers, and one of them is regional. Cycling can be very Toronto focused, and many people, my background included, is not necessarily in Toronto. My
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous background is not in Toronto, and it can also be financially based. We have a
Mm-hmm.
history of not of really to say that not supporting is an understatement, but the
Yeah.
financial barriers in cycling can be, like for many communities, can be a barrier, for Indigenous
Mm-hmm.
people, whether it's the cost of racing or the cost of equipment or the cost of coaching, programming, et cetera, et cetera. Not to say that those barriers are insurmountable, but just that that is definitely a barrier. And I do
Mm-hmm.
think the last one is, again, the cultural, barrier, in the sense that, people may not feel welcome if they're from a very different cultural background.
Yeah, it
Uh,
could be intimidating. Yeah.
Exactly. It can be intimidating, and we've all heard comments. I've heard, racist comments in cycling from various around various people's background, and I think that is a barrier. And so I think those are all things that we need to continue to talk about and work at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there are some strides being made again by some amazing programs. But I think as a community, we need to be conscious that, our sport is stronger when it is a diverse group.
Yeah.
Um, and
More money. Some people don't like to think about that. So hey, let's say, hey, more money. There's be more money if you open it up to everybody and make that effort.
And it's, yeah, exactly. And I just think it's better. And I know in
Mm,
cycling we focus a lot on the results of our athletes at the elite level, like how many athletes we have that are doing well on the world stage. The broader the pool from which we draw those athletes, the better results we're going to have, really, because
hmm.
it just means we're able to find that really young talent, or that really good young talent, earlier, if we can draw
Yeah.
from a more diverse base.
Yep.
um like, to me, that just it's just logical that we want to ensure that as many people as possible feel welcome, and then we can support them as they move up the sport, and then we're that much more equipped to really identify those strong cyclists. Whereas if they meet barriers early on, we may be inadvertently filtering out some of the strongest cyclists that we have in the province at an early
Oh
age,
yeah.
right?
There's
So I
probably,
think
yeah.
they could be hiding, right? And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so I think that's something as a sport that we need to consider. But yeah, I think from my view, again, from my view is different than the view that other Indigenous people may have, but
Hmm.
my mixed background, the side of my family that is Indigenous, um, it's cycling would not have been something that anyone could have participated in at a young age.
Yeah.
And me included, right? So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think we have a ways to go, essentially.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of opportunities, a lot of gaps that if we just took the moment to actually analyze and review these gaps and look at ways to be more inviting, it's going to benefit everybody. Whether or not you care about this stuff. If you're like some companies and they're only looking at the bottom line, saying you're able to make more money if you want. An example that comes to mind is the X Games, for example. I think I brought this up with you, but they still don't allow a women's BMX class, even though BMX has debuted in the Olympics last year. Um, and I was saying, like, they could easily get an advertising contract with like Playtex if they want to be corny, or a sports bra or something. There's just so much um, so much opportunity, and it's said that their director just doesn't believe that the women's level in BMX is there yet for them to justify the commitment, even though it's in every other competition. So with that, I'll say you're losing out on money. That's all you care about.
Well, and I think the other thing is that sport is advantageous to people and youth.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sport supports better mental health. And at the youth level, we know that involvement in any sport at a youth level, you know, it's advantageous to people. It helps build better people.
It
Um,
raises the bar for the next athlete. It's only good if you take some time to invest in it.
and I think, yeah, I think, like, for all youth, that the ability to participate in good sport, in well run, good sport, is just
Hmm.
it's a huge thing for many youth. So I think it's
Yeah.
purely from a building better people, essentially, as I think what sport is about,
Yep.
and as adults as well. And so if we can ensure that we're including as many youth as possible and really spreading around that benefit, I think that's, it's ideal.
Yeah.
um, but we got some barriers to undo before we do that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that there are a lot of changes happening, which I'm really proud to see, compared to when I was a lot younger. So there's definitely that we're moving into the right direction, is what I'm saying. Um, but yeah, this has been a really good chat. Was there anything else you wanted to plug? Anything you want to mention before we go?
Just thank you. I mean, I know you put a lot of work into this, and you put a lot of work into Women's Week as a whole, and it's very much appreciated. And I'm excited to see what else is on tap for Women's Week. So yeah,
Well,
thanks a
thank
lot.
you. No, it comes with a lot of passion. I told Pamela that I just love cycling. I love it, and I think obviously it just helps that I have the background and the education behind it to build something amazing. But I'm pretty proud of what's in store. So I'll definitely include all the links below. And yeah, thanks for your time. I really do appreciate
Cool.
it. Yeah,
Thanks a
awesome.
lot.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.